She kept the ring for 23 years, not the diamond kind, not the kind that means anything to anyone else. A plastic ring from a gumball machine outside a Nebraska gas station, purple, cracked down one side, worth exactly 25 cents. She kept it in a velvet box inside her attic, buried under financial reports and old photographs, tucked away like a secret she was ashamed to admit she still believed in. He didn't know that when he drove back into town with $40 in his wallet, a 6-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, and absolutely nothing left to lose. He was just trying to survive. She was just trying to hold on. Neither of them knew they were looking for the same thing. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The truck made a sound somewhere between a cough and a death rattle when Ethan Holloway pulled off the interstate onto Route 9, the 2-lane stretch of cracked asphalt that cut through the flat belly of Nebraska like an old scar. He eased off the gas, checked the temperature gauge, running a little hot, but not dangerous yet, and let the engine settle into something that at least sounded like it was trying. The sun was going down ahead of him, that specific kind of Nebraska sunset that turns the whole sky the color of a peach that's been left out too long. Orange bleeding into pink, bleeding into a bruised purple at the edges. He'd forgotten about those sunsets. 8 years in Chicago had scrubbed them from his memory, replaced them with the gray-orange glow of city light bouncing off low clouds. This was different. This was the sky with nothing in the way. He heard her shift in the back seat. "Daddy? Hey, Bug, you awake? Are we there yet?" Almost. Lily Holloway was 6 years old and had her mother's eyes, pale green, watchful, the kind that noticed things adults tried to hide. She was sitting up now, hair matted on one side from the car seat, a stuffed rabbit named Gerald wedged under one arm. She looked out the window at the flat land rolling past and seemed to consider it carefully, the way she considered most things, with a seriousness that seemed out of place on a face that still had baby roundness in the cheeks. "It's flat," she said. "Yeah, really flat. Nebraska's like that. Where are the buildings? There aren't many buildings out here." She pressed her nose against the glass. "Where do people live?" "In houses. Regular houses." She was quiet for a moment. "Are we going to live in a regular house?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "We're going to stay with Grandma Ruth for a while." How long is a while? He didn't have an answer for that. He'd been asking himself the same question for the better part of 500 miles, and he still didn't have anything that felt honest. So he said, "We'll see," which was the adult version of "I don't know," and probably didn't fool her for a second. She seemed to accept it anyway. She settled back against the seat, repositioned Gerald, and went back to watching Nebraska happen outside the window. Ethan reached down and turned the radio up a notch. A country station. Some song about a woman leaving a man who didn't deserve her. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was 32 years old, and he was driving back to the town he'd spent the first 20 years of his life trying to escape. Millhaven, Nebraska. Population 4,200, give or take whoever had left or died since the last census. One main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office, and a bar that had changed owners 3 times but never changed its name. The kind of place that shows up in the background of other people's lives. The hometown someone mentions briefly before the story moves on to somewhere more interesting. He'd gotten out at 20, scholarship to Northwestern, a degree in structural engineering that had felt like a passport to a bigger world. He'd used it. Chicago. A firm downtown. A steady salary that turned into a good salary. An apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake. A woman named Claire who was brilliant and restless and wanted everything all at once. He'd married her at 26, which in retrospect was the first in a series of decisions that had made sense at the time and turned out to be wrong. Lily had been born when he was 27, which was not a mistake. Lily was the only thing in the last 5 years that hadn't turned into a mistake. Claire had left when Lily was 4. Not with someone else, at least not initially, though Ethan suspected eventually, but just left, which was somehow harder to hold. She'd said he was steady in the way walls are steady, which he'd initially taken as a compliment until she explained that walls don't go anywhere and she needed someone who moved. She'd moved. She was in Portland now, doing something in tech, calling Lily every Sunday, sending Christmas gifts that arrived early and were always exactly what Lily wanted, which Ethan found quietly infuriating. The divorce had been clean, which meant expensive. He'd kept the apartment. He'd kept the job. He'd kept going. And then, 14 months ago, the firm had collapsed. Not gradually. Suddenly. The way buildings collapse. Fine, and then not. There had been a federal investigation into a project from 3 years prior, a contract Ethan had flagged concerns about and been overruled on. And when the investigation went public, the firm went with it. Client contracts evaporated overnight. The partners dissolved the company before the year was out. Ethan had landed 2 freelance contracts, lost both when the clients learned the firm's name was attached to his resume, and by January had been 4 months behind on rent in an apartment that cost $3,200 a month. He'd sold the furniture first, then the good watch Claire had given him. Then, with the particular shame of a man who has run out of better options, he'd called his mother. Ruth Holloway had picked up on the second ring, listened without interrupting while he explained the whole thing in the flat, controlled voice of a person trying very hard not to crack, and said, "Come home, Ethan. The room's still got your bed in it." He hadn't cried until he'd hung up. Millhaven looked exactly the same and completely different in the way places always do when you come back to them after a long time. The bones were the same, the water tower with the town name painted on it, the grain elevator standing against the sky like a monument to the one thing this part of the world had always been good at, the curve of Elm Street bending past the park. But the details had shifted. The hardware store had new paint. Kramer's Diner had a hand-lettered sign in the window he didn't recognize. Some of the houses looked smaller than he remembered. His mother's house on Birch Avenue was the same. White clapboard, green shutters, the porch that slanted slightly to the left because his father had fixed it wrong in 1998 and died before anyone got around to fixing it right. Ruth Holloway was standing on that porch when the truck turned into the driveway, both hands wrapped around a coffee mug, even though it was nearly 8 in the evening, watching him with the expression she'd always had, like she was glad to see him and sad about the reason at the same time. Lily was out of the car before he'd fully stopped, running across the patchy grass toward her grandmother with the unself-conscious speed of a child who has not yet learned to be embarrassed about enthusiasm. "Grandma!" "Oh, look at you!" Ruth set the mug down on the porch rail and crouched to catch her granddaughter, wrapping her in a hug that looked like it meant business. "You're so much bigger than the last time I saw you. How did that happen?" "I ate all my vegetables," Lily said seriously. Ruth laughed. "Did you now?" Ethan climbed out of the truck and stretched, feeling the miles in his back, his shoulders, the base of his neck. Ruth straightened up and looked at him over Lily's head with an expression that said she saw everything. The exhaustion. The weight he'd lost. The particular look of a man who'd been holding something heavy for too long. "You look terrible," she said. "Thanks, Mom. I've got soup on the stove." Yeah. Thanks." She came down the porch steps and hugged him then, brief and firm, the way Ruth Holloway had always hugged. Nothing demonstrative about it, just solid presence, like she was making sure he was real. He hugged her back, and for just a second he was 20 years old again, and none of the last 12 years had happened. Then Lily grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the house, and the moment passed. He'd been back 3 days when he saw her. He was at Henderson's Hardware on Main Street, buying a bag of wood screws because the back steps at his mother's house had finally rotted through, and Ethan fixed things when he didn't know what else to do with himself. He was standing in the fastener's aisle, studying the difference between 2 sizes of screw that were probably interchangeable when he heard someone say his name. Not said it exactly. More like said it the way you say something when you're not sure you're right about it. "Ethan?" He turned around. He recognized her immediately, which surprised him. It had been 9 years. He'd seen exactly 1 photo of her during that time, an article in some financial magazine that his mother had clipped and mailed to him, which he'd glanced at and put in a drawer somewhere. He'd thought about her the way you think about places you used to live. Not daily, not with any real urgency, but with a low-grade presence that surfaces sometimes when conditions are right. Victoria Sterling was standing at the end of the aisle holding a box of picture hooks, wearing a gray sweater and jeans, hair down, no makeup that he could detect. She looked, he searched for the right word and didn't find one for a second, like herself. Which should have been obvious but wasn't, because he'd spent 9 years with a version of her in his head that was half memory and half the photograph in the magazine, and the woman standing in front of him was more specific than either. She was 30 years old. She'd cut her hair somewhere between then and now. It used to hit the middle of her back. Now it was just past her shoulders. Same dark brown, same eyes, dark gray, almost storm-colored, the kind of eyes that had always looked at things directly and without flinching. She was thinner than he remembered. Not unhealthily so, but leaner, the kind of lean that comes from being busy rather than trying. "Vicky," he said. Something crossed her face, hard to read. "I heard you were back in town. 3 days ago. Small towns." She set the picture hooks back on the shelf, which suggested she hadn't needed them in the first place. "I ran into your mother at the grocery store yesterday. She mentioned—" She stopped, started again. "She said you were staying for a while." "Yeah. How long is a while?" There was that question again. "Don't know yet." She nodded like that was a reasonable answer. Neither of them said anything for a moment, and the hardware store filled itself with the particular awkwardness of two people who used to know everything about each other trying to find the right tone for a conversation in a fastener's aisle. "You look good," he said. "You look tired." "I've been getting that a lot." "Honest crowd you're running with." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it. "Are you actually here for wood screws, or did you need something else?" "Both, turns out." "I'm buying picture hooks I don't need," she said. "I was walking past and I saw your truck out front." She paused. "The one with the dent in the front fender and the Chicago plates?" "My mom mentioned the Chicago plates?" "No, I just—" She stopped. "I recognized the truck." That didn't make sense since she'd never seen that truck, but he decided not to question it. "You want to get coffee?" he asked, and then immediately wasn't sure why he'd said it. She looked at him for a moment, something behind her eyes working through something. "Okay," she said. But Kramer's Diner had changed hands twice, but kept the same vinyl booths and the same coffee that tasted like it had been there since the original ownership. They sat across from each other at a table by the window, and Linda, the waitress, poured coffee without asking and looked between them with barely concealed curiosity before retreating. "Small towns," Victoria said again. "By tomorrow morning, everyone will know we had coffee. By tonight." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "There's nothing to talk about here. We become the thing to talk about. That ever bother you? Living here still?" She shrugged. "I'm not here that much. I split my time. Omaha, mostly. New York, when I have to." She glanced out the window at the main street. "I come back for Dad." Ethan knew that, or he'd known the general shape of it, that George Sterling had been sick, that it had been going on for a while. His mother had mentioned it in her last few emails, the careful way she mentioned things she thought might matter to him. George Sterling had been the town doctor for 30 years. Quiet man. Kind. He'd stitched up Ethan's knee when Ethan was 9 after a bike accident that had been at least partially Victoria's fault, and he'd never mentioned it to either of their parents. "How is he?" Ethan asked. "Bad days more than good days now." Her voice was level, the kind of level that takes effort. "He doesn't always know where he is. Sometimes he doesn't know who I am." She looked down at her coffee. "Those days are harder. I'm sorry, Vicky." "Victoria," she said, not sharply, just correcting. "Right." He'd forgotten that. She'd started going by Victoria sometime in high school, shedding the childhood nickname like a name she'd grown out of. He'd been gone by then. "Sorry, Victoria." "It's fine. You can—" She stopped. "It's fine." They were quiet for a moment. Outside on Main Street, a pickup truck went by. A woman walked a dog. The late afternoon was doing that thing where the light went gold and everything looked like a postcard of itself. "I read about what happened," she said. "With the firm." "Yeah." "The Whitfield project, that was yours?" "I was on the team. I flagged the load-bearing calculations in the South Wing as inadequate. They overruled me." He looked at his coffee. When the investigation started, it didn't matter that I'd flagged it. My name was still on the project. That's not fair. No. Did you? She hesitated. Legal options? Looked into it. Lawyer said it'd take 2 years and most of what I had left to win what the firm owed me, and there was no guarantee. He shrugged. It was a practice shrug, the kind you develop after you've explained something painful enough times that you've worn the edges off it. I have a daughter. I couldn't bet 2 years and everything on a maybe. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking at him with that direct, evaluating look she'd always had, the one that had used to make him feel like she was taking a measurement. Where's her mother? Portland. The divorce was final 18 months ago. Claire has her Sundays to Tuesdays, school permitting. I have the rest. He paused. Lily. Her name's Lily. She's 6. What's she like? The question surprised him slightly, not because it was strange, but because it was immediate. Not how did the divorce happen, or that must be hard, but what is she like? Victoria had always done that, gone straight to the thing she actually wanted to know. She's serious, he said. Thinks before she talks. Asks a lot of questions about how things work. She was upset that the engine in a toy car didn't have a real engine. He almost smiled. She's funnier than she means to be. Victoria looked at the table, something quiet in her expression. She sounds like you. She's better than me. Most kids are better than their parents. That's the point. She picked up her coffee. What are you going to do for work? Freelance. There's a firm in Omaha that's expressed interest. Nothing formal yet. He looked at her. I need to rebuild some, track record, references. After the Whitfield thing, my name's associated with it, even though it shouldn't be. I need to put some distance between then and now. I know people in Omaha. I'm not asking. I know you're not. I'm offering. She said it flatly, with no apparent interest in making it into a moment. You were good, Ethan. You were always better at the technical work than anyone else we graduated with. I'm not going to sit here and not say that because it might seem like charity. He looked at her across the table. 9 years had made her more direct, which he hadn't thought was possible. There had always been something in her, a certainty about what she thought, what she valued, what she was willing to say out loud, that had set her apart from most people he'd known. The years and the money and the things that had happened had apparently just stripped everything else away. I'll think about it, he said. That means no. It means I'll think about it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee again and looked out the window, and they sat in something that felt cautiously like the old shape of knowing someone. He'd taped. The story of Victoria Sterling's success was one that Millhaven had followed the way small towns follow local kids who make it big, with a mixture of pride and slight bewilderment, the way you feel watching someone you knew as a child do something extraordinary. You know them. You don't quite believe it. She'd started her first company at 22, still in college, a logistics software platform for small agricultural businesses that had solved a specific, unglamorous problem in a way nobody had thought to solve it before. She'd sold it at 24 for a number that people in Millhaven had stopped being able to picture accurately. The number that came next, from her second company, Sterling Analytics, a data management firm that had grown in 7 years from 12 employees to 700, was larger, the kind of number that stopped being real and started being theoretical. She was 30 years old and worth, depending on which estimate you trusted, somewhere between $2 and $1.8 billion. Ethan had thought about that a handful of times over the years, and each time it had felt slightly unreal, the way thinking about the size of space feels unreal. He knew her. He had genuinely known her, not as a public figure or a success story, but as the girl who'd split a bag of chips with him on the bleachers every Friday in 6th grade, and who'd cried at the end of Charlotte's Web, and then made him swear never to tell anyone. He'd kept that secret. He wasn't sure why. It had just always seemed like it belonged to her. He ran into her twice more in the next 2 weeks. Once at the gas station on Route 9, where they stood at adjacent pumps and made the particular conversation of people who aren't sure yet whether they're becoming friends again, or just two people from the same small town who keep intersecting. Once at the town park, where Lily was on the swings, and Victoria had been walking alone on the path that ran around the perimeter, and Ethan had introduced them. Lily had looked at Victoria with her serious green eyes and said, "Are you Daddy's friend from when he was little?" Victoria had crouched down to her level, which most adults didn't do and which Lily apparently noticed because she visibly approved. "I am," Victoria said. "We grew up together." "Did you like him?" "I did." "He's good," Lily said in the authoritative tone she used when reporting facts. "He makes good pancakes and he knows how to fix things and he's sad sometimes, but he doesn't want you to notice." Ethan felt the air leave the conversation. Victoria looked up at him. Her expression was doing something complicated. She looked back at Lily. "I know," she said quietly. "I'll try to notice." Lily seemed satisfied with this. She turned back to the swing. "Okay," she said. "You can push me if you want." And Victoria, 30-year-old billionaire, stood up and walked over and pushed a 6-year-old on a swing in a Nebraska park while Ethan sat on a bench and watched and tried to figure out what was happening to him. Chas. He fixed the back steps at his mother's house first, then the gutter on the north side that had been pulling away from the fascia, then a cracked window frame in the kitchen. He needed to stay busy. Not because staying busy solved anything, but because stopping meant sitting with the exact dimensions of what his life had become, and he wasn't ready for that yet. He got up at 6 every morning, made Lily breakfast, helped his mother with whatever needed help, and worked on freelance proposals in the evenings when Lily was asleep. The Omaha firm was slow to respond. He sent follow-up emails that were professional and not desperate, which was harder than it sounded. He was replacing a broken section of fence in his mother's backyard on a cold Thursday morning, the kind of Nebraska November that doesn't bother being subtle about the fact that winter is coming, when he heard the gate open behind him. He turned around. Victoria was standing there in a dark coat with her hands in her pockets, looking at the fence with an appraising expression. "You didn't call ahead," he said. "I was in the area. You live 20 minutes outside town." "I was in this specific area." She nodded at the fence. "You're putting that post in crooked." "I'm not. The second one from the left, it's off by maybe 3 degrees. He looked at it. He looked back at her. "It's 2 degrees. Still crooked. It's a residential fence, not as a..." He stopped. "What are you doing here, Victoria?" She was quiet for a moment, looking at the fence, then at the yard, then at him. She pulled her hands out of her pockets and then put them back in. "I have a problem," she said. "I've been trying to decide whether to tell you about it." "Why would you tell me about it?" "Because you're the only person in my life who isn't either trying to help me fix it or trying to make it worse," she said. "I just want someone to know about it who isn't..." She stopped, started again. "There's nobody else I'd tell." He studied her face for a moment. The directness was still there, but underneath it, something else. Something that looked like the outer edge of exhaustion, the kind that sleep doesn't touch. He set down the post and gestured at the porch steps. "Sit down," he said. "I'll make coffee." She told him about the board. It came out in pieces, not in order. Not because she was trying to be confusing, but because it was clearly something she'd been carrying alone long enough that it didn't have a clean narrative shape anymore. He let her talk. He'd always been good at that. The short version, 3 of Sterling Analytics' 7 board members had been quietly building a coalition for the past 8 months. A man named Brennan Carr, her chief strategy officer, a man she'd hired herself, a man she'd trusted, had been feeding them information about the company's internal debt structure in ways that made it look more precarious than it was. There was a vote scheduled for December. If they got the numbers, they could force her out. "Why?" Ethan said. "There's an acquisition offer on the table from a German conglomerate, $2.3 billion. The board members pushing this hold equity. If the acquisition goes through, they all walk away very wealthy." She looked at her coffee. "I've been blocking the acquisition for a year because I know what they'll do with the company. They'll strip it down, sell the IP, lay off the staff. 700 people. Can you stop it?" "I've been trying to stop it for 8 months and I'm losing ground." She said it flatly. No self-pity, just the fact of it. Brennan has been feeding them financials that are technically accurate but framed to look like the company is in distress. There's nothing technically illegal about it. I can't prove bad faith. I can prove that he misrepresented... She stopped. I need someone who can read structural data and find where the misrepresentation is happening. Someone who can look at how numbers are being framed and tell the story differently. He looked at her. You're not asking me to help. I didn't say that. You just described exactly what I do. You're a structural engineer. I read load-bearing calculations to determine whether the framing supports the weight or whether someone's made the math look right while the structure is wrong. He held her gaze. You're talking about the same thing with different numbers. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him. He'd said the right thing, or at least the honest thing. I'm not in a position to pay you properly right now, she said. The company's finances are being watched. Any unusual expenditure. I didn't say anything about money. I'm not accepting charity from... It's not charity. You gave me a contact at the Omaha firm. This is the same thing. He picked up his coffee. I know what it's like to have work that was done right misrepresented as something else. I'm not going to sit here and watch that happen to you if there's something I can do about it. She looked at him for a long time, something in her expression that was hard to read. Not quite surprise, not quite relief, something more complicated than either. You haven't changed, she said. I've changed a lot. Not in the part that matters. He didn't say anything to that. He looked at the yard, the November gray sky above the bare trees. The wind was picking up. He'd need to finish the fence before it got dark. Send me whatever documents you have, he said. The financials, the board presentations, whatever Carr's been distributing. I'll start looking tonight. She nodded once. Quick, precise. Like a decision made. Okay, she said. They sat there in the cold on his mother's back porch and drank the rest of the coffee, and neither of them said anything else for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was something different, the particular quiet of two people who have found, without quite meaning to, that they can exist in the same space without needing to perform for each other. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He suspected she had too. He started going through the documents that night, after Lily was in bed, and his mother was watching television in the living room, the soft sound of some old movie drifting under the door. He spread the files across the kitchen table, financial projections, board meeting summaries, quarterly reports, the presentations Brennan Carr had prepared and distributed. He made a pot of coffee, and he started reading. It took him 40 minutes to see the first problem. It was in the Q3 report, a comparison of operating costs to revenue that was technically accurate in every figure, but structured in a way that buried the 5-year growth trend. If you read the document quickly, which busy board members almost certainly would, you'd see a company where operating costs were outpacing revenue in the short term. You wouldn't see, unless you stopped and looked carefully, that the same company had tripled its revenue over 5 years while keeping cost growth proportional. It was the difference between saying this building is under stress right now and leaving out the fact that it was designed to carry the load and had been tested to do so. He circled it in red pen and kept reading. By midnight, he had 6 more. He sat back in the kitchen chair with the Nebraska dark outside the window and the house quiet around him and looked at what he'd found. 7 places where the data was technically correct and structurally dishonest. 7 places where Brennan Carr had taken a real company with real strength and made it look, to someone who wasn't looking carefully, like something that was about to fall. Ethan knew exactly what it was. He'd seen it done with buildings. He'd had it done to him. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Victoria. Found 7 misrepresentations in the Q3 and Q4 reports. This is fixable. Call me tomorrow. He stared at the message for a moment before he sent it. Then he sent it. He stayed at that kitchen table for another hour, not because he needed to, but because the work felt, for the first time in a long time, like something that mattered. Like he was good at something again. Like he'd found, in the middle of what had looked from the outside like the wreckage of everything, a single solid piece of ground. Outside, the Nebraska wind had stopped. The night was very still. In the back bedroom, Lily was asleep with Gerald the rabbit tucked under her arm, breathing the slow, even breath of a child who trusted completely in the safety of wherever she was. Down the hall, Ruth Holloway had turned off the television and gone to bed. And in the kitchen, under the yellow light, with the red pen and the document spread out across the table, Ethan Holloway was, for the first time in a very long time, actually home. Victoria called at 7:45 the next morning which told him she'd been awake for a while. He was in the kitchen making Lily's breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, Lily's standing order, no substitutions accepted, when the phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up with one hand and kept stirring with the other. 7 misrepresentations, she said without preamble. Tell me the worst one. Good morning to you too. Ethan. Q3 operating cost comparison. Page 11 of Carr's presentation to the board. He turned the heat down under the eggs. He compared your current quarter's operating costs to industry averages without adjusting for growth stage. Your costs look high because you're in an expansion phase, but he's benchmarking you against mature companies. Anyone who's run a growing business knows you don't do that comparison. Anyone who hasn't run one looks at the numbers and sees a company burning money it doesn't have. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of someone not understanding. The silence of someone doing a very controlled thing with their breathing. He knows that, she said. He knows exactly what he's doing. Yeah. I trusted him. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Not with drama, with the flat, stripped-down quality of a fact that had stopped hurting in the sharp way and started hurting in the dull, constant way. He was my first real hire outside of my co-founders. I taught him how this company worked. Ethan took the eggs off the heat. I know. You don't have to say you know when you don't. I do know. I didn't have someone do it to me at this scale, but I know what it's like to watch something you built get used against you. He paused. It makes you question everything you were sure about. Another silence. This one, different. Yes, she said. That's exactly what it does. Lily appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair wild, dragging Gerald by one ear. She looked at Ethan with the expression of someone who had been awake for at least several minutes and had opinions about breakfast. Hold on 1 second, he said into the phone. He looked at Lily. 2 minutes. Sit down. Gerald is hungry too, Lily said. Gerald doesn't eat eggs. He might want to try. Sit down, Bug. He put the phone back to his ear. Sorry, 6-year-old. He heard something shift in Victoria's voice, just slightly. Don't apologize for that. I need to know what you want me to do with what I found, he said. I can put together a counter presentation, something that shows the board the same data framed accurately, but I need to know if you want to fight this or if you're... I'm not surrendering my company to Brennan Carr. Okay. Not yet. Not like this. He noticed the not yet. He filed it away and didn't comment on it. Then give me a week, he said. I'll have something you can put in front of the board. She paused. Why are you doing this? He thought about that for a second. The honest answer was complicated, and he didn't have time for complicated because his daughter was staring at him with escalating eggs-related impatience. So he said the part that was simple and true because somebody should have done it for me and nobody did. He heard her exhale. Okay, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might be wrong about some of it. You're not. How would you know? You haven't seen the counter-analysis yet. I've known you since you were 10 years old, she said. When you were sure about something structural, you were always right. Even when Mr. Patterson said you were wrong about the beam calculations in the shop class project, you were right. He'd forgotten about that. 7th grade, shop class. He'd calculated the weight tolerance of a shelf incorrectly on purpose, he'd thought. But it turned out he'd done it correctly the first time and then second-guessed himself. The shelf had held. Mr. Patterson had never acknowledged it. You remember that? He said. I remember most things, she said, and then before he could respond to whatever that was, I'll send you the full board documentation, all of it, even the parts I haven't shown anyone. All right? Ethan. She stopped. Be careful with what I send you. Some of it is, if it got to the wrong people before I'm ready. Victoria. It's me. A beat. I know, she said. That's why I'm sending it. She hung up. Ethan set the phone down and turned back to the stove. Lily was watching him with her chin propped on her fists. Was that your friend? She asked. Yeah. The one from the park? Yeah. Lily seemed to consider this. She looked sad, she said, when she was pushing me on the swing. She smiled, but her eyes looked sad. Ethan set the eggs on the table. He sat down across from his daughter and looked at her for a moment. This small, serious person who had, without any apparent effort, just described in 8 words something it had taken him 3 conversations to arrive at. "You're very observant," he said. Lily shrugged. Gerald noticed too. The documentation Victoria sent was extensive. It came in 3 separate encrypted files: financial records, board correspondence, and a third folder marked simply "car" that contained everything she'd gathered about her CSO's activities over the past 8 months. She'd been building a case quietly, carefully, without telling anyone. Reading through it was like watching someone try to hold a crumbling wall together with their bare hands while everyone else in the building went about their day. She had most of what she needed. What she was missing was the framing, a way to present the true picture of the company's financial health to the board in a format that was undeniable. Not just accurate, but structurally airtight, something you couldn't pick apart because every load-bearing element was where it was supposed to be. That was what Ethan did. He worked on it in the evenings, at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep. His mother, who was not a woman who asked a lot of questions once she'd understood the general shape of a situation, left coffee on the counter and went to bed without comment. He appreciated that more than he could have said. He also, during those 2 weeks, started spending more time with Victoria in ways that were not about the documents. It started practically. She was working remotely from her father's house, a 10-minute drive from his mother's place, and it made sense to go over the analysis together rather than doing it by phone. He'd drive out in the morning, sometimes with Lily, sometimes alone. They'd sit at George Sterling's kitchen table, a large house that had been a doctor's home for 30 years and still felt like one, quietly dignified, books on every surface, the smell of old wood, and work through the numbers. George Sterling was usually in the next room, in a chair by the window, with a nurse named Dale, who came 3 days a week and was a large, patient man who had a gift for talking to George about things George could still hold on to. Some days George knew where he was. Some days he didn't. On the days he didn't, Victoria moved through the house with a particular careful efficiency. Not cold, but controlled, the way people are controlled when they've learned that falling apart doesn't help, and they've made a private arrangement with themselves to fall apart later, somewhere private. Ethan watched that and said nothing about it, because he recognized it. He'd done the same thing in the year after the firm collapsed, while Claire was leaving and Lily was 4, and everything was happening at once. You don't fall apart in front of the emergency. You hold the thing that needs holding and you fall apart later in the car, or in the shower, or at 2 in the morning when everyone else is asleep. He didn't say any of this to Victoria. He just noticed it. One morning he brought Lily and George Sterling had a good day. He was clear-eyed and sitting up straight in his chair when they arrived, and when Lily walked into the living room ahead of Ethan and stopped in front of him with her usual unselfconscious directness, the old doctor looked at her and smiled. "Well," he said, "who are you?" "Lily Holloway. My daddy is Ethan. He grew up here." She pointed at Victoria, who was standing in the doorway. "He was your daughter's friend." George looked from Lily to Victoria, and something moved across his face. Recognition, warmth, something that made him look for a moment like the man he'd been before all of this. "Ethan Holloway," he said. He looked at Ethan. "I remember you. You used to eat all of Vicky's Halloween candy." "She gave it to me voluntarily," Ethan said. "That's not how I heard it." Victoria made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. It didn't quite make it, but it got closer than anything Ethan had heard from her in the 2 weeks since he'd come back. George and Lily ended up in a long conversation about rabbits. Whether Gerald was a real rabbit or a toy rabbit, and whether toy rabbits dreamed and what they might dream about, that occupied the better part of an hour. Ethan and Victoria sat at the kitchen table with the documents and did not, for once, talk about the documents. "He's been doing better this week," Victoria said. "He seemed sharp today. Dale thinks it's because the weather's changed, something about barometric pressure affecting cognition." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I don't know if that's real or if Dale is just trying to give me something to hold on to. Maybe both. Maybe." She looked at the window. The November light was gray and flat. "I keep thinking about what it'll be like when there are no more good days, whether I'll have been here enough." She stopped. "Sorry, don't apologize. I don't usually talk about this." "I know." He looked at her. "You don't have to explain it." She looked at him for a moment, that direct, measuring look. "You're very easy to be around," she said. "You always were. But it's different now. I can't quite—" She stopped again. "I'm not sure what I mean." "I think you mean you're tired," he said, "and you're not used to having someone around who isn't either trying to fix you or trying to take something." She looked down at her mug. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's it exactly." From the next room came the sound of Lily explaining to George Sterling with great seriousness that Gerald the rabbit was afraid of the dark but was working on it. Ethan finished the counter-analysis on a Sunday night in late November. It was 43 pages, double verified, with the kind of internal consistency that didn't leave gaps for reinterpretation. He'd gone through every one of Carr's presentations and translated each one, not by replacing the numbers because the numbers were real, but by showing what those numbers actually meant when you put them in accurate context. The result was a portrait of a company that was not in crisis. It was a company in a growth phase, carrying debt that was proportional and structured, with revenue trajectories that any legitimate analyst would recognize as healthy. He sent it to Victoria at 11:15 on a Sunday night with the message, "Done. Read it in the morning when you're fresh. Call me after." She called at 7 a.m. "This is good," she said. Flat? Certain. Coming from Victoria Sterling, that was the equivalent of someone else saying, "This is extraordinary." "There's a gap in section 4, he said. "The Q2 projections. I didn't have the underlying model, so I worked backward from the actuals. If Carr has the original model, he could challenge that section." "I have the original model. I'll send it. You can close the gap." "Give me 2 days." "I need it by Friday. The board meeting is December 14th. "You'll have it Thursday." She paused. "Ethan." "Yeah." "This changes things. If I can put this in front of the right board members before the 14th. "You have 4 board members who aren't in Carr's camp?" "Officially 4. 2 of them I'm not sure about. They're not against me, but they're not sure they're for me either. This—" She stopped. "This gives them something solid to stand on. People who are uncertain don't want to pick a side. They want to be shown what's real. Then show them what's real." She was quiet for a moment. "You say things like they're simple." "Some things are." "Not in my world." "Then maybe your world has a problem." He said it evenly, without judgment. "The data isn't complicated, Victoria. Carr made it look complicated because complicated is harder to challenge. What we're doing is just cleaning the glass, showing what was always there." Another pause. Then, "Can you come over this morning? I want to go through section 4 with you." "I've got Lily." "Bring her. Dad's been asking about the rabbit." He found himself smiling at that, which surprised him slightly. He hadn't been doing much of that. "We'll be there by 9, he said. December arrived, and with it the particular cold that settles into the Nebraska plains like it means to stay for months, which it does. The sky went flat white most days, the kind of sky that presses down, and the fields on either side of Route 9 turned the color of old straw. Ethan had been back in Millhaven for 6 weeks. He'd fixed the fence, the steps, the gutter, and the window frame at his mother's house. He'd started a freelance project for a small engineering firm in Lincoln. Real work, modest pay, but his name attached to something solid and recent. He'd had 2 calls with the Omaha firm, and they were moving toward a formal arrangement. Things were not good yet. They were better than they had been. He was also, without having planned it or named it or thought about it too carefully, spending most of his non-working time with Victoria Sterling. It wasn't complicated, or at least it didn't feel complicated from inside it. She had work to do, and he was helping with part of it. Her father had become unexpectedly attached to Lily, and Lily had become attached to him in the way children attach to old people who take them seriously, which George Sterling did. It was practical. It made sense. That was what Ethan told himself. He was not entirely sure he believed it. There were things he noticed, small things, the way she tucked one foot under herself when she sat at the kitchen table and the work was going well, which she never did when she was tense. The way she talked to her father, not in the careful, simplified way some people talk to someone with memory loss, but in the normal, full way, as if the lucidity might return at any moment and she wanted to be ready for it. The way she looked at Lily sometimes, with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read, something that might have been longing except that word seemed too large for it. He also noticed when she wasn't okay, and more importantly, he noticed that she was not used to anyone noticing. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks before the board meeting. He'd come alone. Lily was at school, Ruth was watching pickup, and they'd been working for 2 hours on a revised version of the executive summary when Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen and something in her face changed. She stood up and walked out of the kitchen. He heard her voice in the hallway, low and controlled, and then a silence, and then she came back in. She stood at the kitchen counter with her back to him for a long moment. Victoria? Brennan's called an emergency pre-meeting with the swing votes, tomorrow. She didn't turn around. He's trying to get to them before I can present the counter-analysis. Can you get to them tonight? Reynolds is in New York. Park is... She stopped. I can get Park. Reynolds won't take my call if Brennan's already been in contact. He's cautious, and Brennan knows how to work cautious people. What does Reynolds care about? She turned around. Her jaw was tight. What? If he's a cautious person, he's risk-averse. What's the risk Carr is selling him? And what's the risk on the other side that Carr isn't telling him about? She looked at him. He could see her mind working. If the acquisition goes through and the company gets stripped, there's reputational exposure for any board member who voted for it. The German firm has a complicated history with labor practices. Reynolds has political ambitions. She paused. He wouldn't want to be associated with a mass layoff. Then lead with that, not the financial analysis, the exposure. She stared at him. That's not how I usually... I know, but you're not trying to win a logic argument right now. You're trying to win a person. He held her gaze. Carr knows how to win people. You know how to win arguments. You need to do both. Something moved across her face. When did you get this good at this? I'm an engineer. I've spent my career figuring out why structures fail. Usually it's not because the materials are bad. It's because someone didn't account for how the load gets distributed under pressure. He paused. People aren't different. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, the particular gray gold of a Nebraska December afternoon, and it caught the side of her face, and she looked, for just a moment, not like a billionaire with a company under siege, but like the girl who used to sit on the bleachers with him on Friday afternoons and talk about everything and nothing and a future that felt like it could be anything. I don't know what I'd be doing right now if you weren't here, she said. You'd be doing fine, he said. You were doing fine before I showed up. I was doing fine the way someone is fine right before they collapse. She said it without self-pity, just plainly. I was holding everything by myself, and I had been for so long that I'd stopped noticing how much of it there was. He didn't say anything. My father is sick, and I'm losing my company, and there is nobody... She stopped, caught herself, looked down. There's nobody I can call at the end of a bad day who isn't going to want something from me in return, whether it's information or access or reassurance or... She stopped again. I have 1,000 professional contacts and I am completely alone. He sat there, let that land, didn't rush to fill it. You're not alone right now, he said. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't the kind of person who cried easily, or at least wasn't the kind who let it show, but there was something raw and unguarded in her face that he hadn't seen before. No, she said quietly. I'm not. She held his gaze for a beat, 2 beats, and then she straightened up and picked up her phone and said, I need to call Park tonight. Can you help me figure out what to say? Yeah, he said. Pull up a chair. She sat back down, pulled her laptop toward her, looked at the screen, and then at him. Thank you, she said. Not performatively, just the word, like she meant it exactly as much as it weighed. Don't mention it, he said. But they both knew he meant it too. Park voted with her. Reynolds didn't show up to Carr's pre-meeting. He sent an email to the full board 40 minutes before it was scheduled to start, citing a scheduling conflict, and Carr had to cancel. Victoria got the news from her assistant at 8:30 in the morning and stood in her father's kitchen reading the message 3 times before she let herself believe it. She called Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. Reynolds pulled out of Carr's meeting, she said. I know, he called me. She stopped. He called you. Why would Reynolds call you? Because I sent him a one-page summary of the reputational exposure last night after you went to bed. Just the labor practices angle, the political timeline, 3 paragraphs. I got his direct number from the board directory you gave me. A pause. I should have told you first. I'm sorry. She should have been annoyed. She'd given him that directory for the analysis work, not for direct board contact. She should have been annoyed, and she wasn't. And she wasn't sure how to feel about that. What did he say? She asked. That he needed more time to review the full counter-analysis, which means he read it, which means he's not locked in with Carr. Ethan paused. He's not with you yet, but he's not against you. That might be enough. It buys you time. She sat down at the kitchen table. The December morning was pressing against the windows, gray and cold. In the next room, she could hear Dale's voice, low and steady, talking to her father about something. The sound of it was both reassuring and devastating in the particular way of things you've learned to be grateful for because you know they won't always be there. You went behind my back, she said. Not accusatory, just naming it. Yes. And it worked. Yes. She exhaled slowly. Don't do that again without telling me first. Fair. But thank you. Don't thank me. It's not over. She knew that. She'd known it since the board meeting had been officially confirmed for December 14th, 6 days away. And she knew that Reynolds staying neutral wasn't the same as Reynolds voting with her, and that Carr still had 2 confirmed votes, and that the math was still uncomfortable. But there was something different about this morning than about any morning in the past 3 weeks. She could feel it in the specific way she was sitting, the way her shoulders weren't up near her ears for the first time in what felt like months. Come over this afternoon, she said. We need to go through the presentation order. I'll be there at 2. Bring Lily. Dad's been asking about Gerald. George Sterling had another good day that Tuesday. Not as clear as the day with the Halloween candy story, but present, more present than the bad days, when he moved through the house like a man navigating a place he half recognized and kept reaching for something he couldn't name. Today, he knew where he was. He knew who Lily was, which seemed to please Lily enormously. He sat in his chair by the window and watched the Nebraska winter with the expression of a man who'd been watching Nebraska winters for 60 years and had more or less come to terms with them. Lily had appointed herself his entertainment, which George appeared to accept without objection. She was telling him about school, about a project involving the water cycle that she felt had been inadequately explained by her teacher, who had said water went up into clouds, but hadn't satisfactorily addressed the question of how. When Ethan and Victoria came in from the kitchen and found them deep in an earnest discussion about evaporation that George was navigating with more precision than most people would have expected. The sun heats the water, George was saying, and when water gets hot enough, it doesn't want to stay liquid anymore. So it turns into vapor, like steam, and rises. But how does it know to come back down? It doesn't know anything. It gets cold up high, and cold water wants to be liquid again. He paused. Things don't always want to stay in the form they're in. Conditions change them. Lily thought about this seriously. So the water didn't choose to go up. No, it just responded to what was happening around it. That's kind of sad. Or kind of freeing, George said, depending on how you look at it. Ethan glanced at Victoria beside him. She was watching her father with an expression he'd seen before, but not quite like this. Love and grief all folded into the same thing, the way those two feelings have a way of becoming indistinguishable when someone's time is becoming finite. She felt him looking and met his eyes. Didn't look away. Didn't say anything. Just let him see it for a second, which from Victoria Sterling was its own kind of trust. Then she turned back toward the kitchen. Presentation order, she said. Presentation order, he agreed. The 6 days before the board meeting were the longest 6 days Ethan could remember in recent history, which was saying something given the year he'd had. They worked every morning. He reviewed, she revised. They argued, genuinely argued, not fought, but the kind of disagreement where two people who know what they're talking about go back and forth on something real. About whether to lead with the financial counter-analysis or with the company's strategic vision. Ethan thought led with the numbers. Victoria thought led with the vision. The numbers prove you're right, he said. The vision reminds them why right matters. In my experience, boards respond to Victoria. I understand boards less than you do, but I understand how people decide whether to trust something. He pushed the draft across the table toward her. You put the numbers first, you're playing defense from the jump. You're saying this is why Carr is wrong. Lead with the vision, and you're saying this is where we're going. Then the numbers prove you can get there. She looked at the draft, looked at him, looked back at the draft. I hate it when you're right, she said. I know. She restructured the opening. He was right, and they both knew it, and she revised without making it into a thing, which he appreciated. The night before the board meeting, she called him at 10:30. I can't sleep, she said. I know. Stop saying you know. Sorry. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her moving around, the soft sound of footsteps on hardwood, the creak of a door. If this doesn't work, she said, if they vote against me, don't. I need to think about it. I need to think about what I'd do. Then think about it, but don't do it tonight. He sat back in the kitchen chair. The house was quiet. Tonight you've done everything you can do. The presentation is solid. The numbers are right. Park is with you. Reynolds is not against you. Tomorrow you go in there and you show them what's real. He paused. That's all you can control. What if real isn't enough? Then you'll deal with what comes next when it comes. But don't borrow that problem tonight. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he checked to make sure the call was still connected. My mother used to say that, she said finally. Don't borrow problems. He didn't know much about Victoria's mother. She died when Victoria was 12. A car accident on the interstate, a truck that came into her lane. It was one of the few things Victoria had never talked about freely, even when they were kids. He'd known not to push. She was smart, he said. Yes. A pause. She would have liked you. She liked people who were steady, who meant what they said. He didn't know what to do with that, so he let it sit. Try to sleep, he said. You need to be sharp tomorrow. I know. A beat. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you. Not just for the work. For... She stopped. All of it. Get some sleep, Victoria. Good night. She hung up. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark Nebraska night and stared at the wall for a while and tried to identify what he was feeling and couldn't get it fully sorted before exhaustion made the question irrelevant. The board meeting was in Omaha, in the Sterling Analytics offices on the 14th floor of a glass building that looked out over the Missouri River on a gray December morning. Ethan drove the 2 hours in. He hadn't been asked to attend. This wasn't his meeting, his company, his fight. But Victoria had called him at 6 a.m. as he was making Lily's breakfast and said, Are you coming? With the tone of someone who was asking a logistical question but meant something else. You want me there? He said. Yes. I'll drop Lily at my mom's and drive up. He waited in the lobby. He wasn't allowed in the boardroom. He had no standing to be there. But she'd said she wanted him in the building, and he understood that. Sometimes you just needed to know there was someone in your corner who wasn't also evaluating the angle. He sat in a leather chair in the lobby with a terrible cup of vending machine coffee and waited. It took 3 hours. He knew it wasn't going to be clean before she walked out of the elevator, because 3 hours meant it had been contested, and contested meant the numbers had not simply resolved it. Her face when she came out confirmed it. She walked toward him with the careful, controlled movement of someone holding something fragile very tightly. 4-3, she said. He looked at her. You got 4? Park and Reynolds both voted with me. The fourth was Mira Osei. She's been quiet for months. I wasn't sure about her. She read the full counter-analysis, and she voted with me. She stopped in front of him. The acquisition is blocked. Carr doesn't have the votes. That's a win. Yes. She said it without joy. He waited. He resigned, effective immediately. He said, She stopped, pressed her lips together for a second. He said the company had lost its vision and he wasn't going to wait around for the board to come to its senses. She looked past Ethan at the lobby windows, at the gray Missouri River beyond. 7 years. I hired him personally. I brought him into every major decision. She shook her head slightly. I keep thinking I should have seen it. I keep going back through the last 2 years trying to find the moment I should have known. You trusted him, Ethan said. That's not a failure. It cost me 8 months and Victoria. He waited until she looked at him. Trusting someone who later betrays you is not the same thing as being naive. You can't run a company. You can't run a life without trusting people. Some of them will let you down. That's not a flaw in you. It's a condition of being in the world. She looked at him for a moment, something in her face working through something. You sound very certain about that. I'm certain about that. She nodded slowly, looked down, then back up. There's something else, she said. The board wants a restructuring plan by Q1. Mira made it a condition of her vote. I have to reduce operational overhead by 15%, or the acquisition question comes back to the table in March. How bad is that? It means cuts. Not catastrophic cuts, but real ones. Some positions. She exhaled. And it means I am walking into the next 3 months with a company that's intact but wounded, and a board that voted 4-3, which means 3 people in that room are waiting for me to stumble. He said nothing for a moment. Let her have the weight of that without rushing to make it lighter. What do you need right now? He said. She looked at him. Genuinely looked. Not strategically, not calculating, but with the kind of direct, undefended look that he'd been seeing more of lately, the one that appeared when she stopped managing the interaction and just existed in it. Food, she said. I haven't eaten since last night, and I think I'm going to fall over. There's a diner 2 blocks from here. You know that because you've been sitting in this lobby for 3 hours researching diners. I've been sitting in this lobby for 3 hours. Yes. Something shifted in her expression. That almost smile, the one that didn't quite arrive. Let's go, she said. They sat in a booth by the window with the kind of food that was purely functional. Eggs, toast, coffee, that was better than the lobby vending machine, but not significantly. And she ate with the focused efficiency of someone whose body had been overruling their mind for several hours and was finally getting what it needed. He watched her without watching her. The way you do when you're trying not to make someone self-conscious. She looked up and caught him anyway. Stop. I wasn't doing anything. You were doing the thing where you watch me to make sure I'm okay. I was looking at the window. You were looking at the window and monitoring me with your peripheral vision. He drank his coffee. You're fine. I know I'm fine. She looked down at her plate, looked back up. Ethan, why did you drive 2 hours to sit in a lobby? He considered the question, considered several honest answers, some of which were more than he was ready to say, settled on the one that was true and also manageable. Because when I was losing everything last year, there was nobody in my corner who wasn't somehow affected by what happened to me. My lawyer was billing me. My colleagues were managing their own fallout. Claire was already gone. He looked at his coffee. I just kept thinking if there was one person who was just there, not to fix it, just there. He glanced up. You had someone to call at the end of a bad day, that's all. She was quiet for a long moment. I haven't had that in a long time, she said. I know. The last person I had that with, she stopped. The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, and he didn't fill it. She picked up her coffee, looked out the window at the Omaha street, at people moving along the sidewalk in winter coats, going about their particular Tuesday as if nothing significant was happening in this booth at this table, which, to them, it wasn't. I want to tell you something, she said, and I need you to not make it into more than it is. Okay? When I heard you were back in Millhaven, when your mother told me at the grocery store, I went home and I took out the ring. She said it simply, no dramatics, just the fact. The plastic ring, from the gas station. She looked at him. I still have it. He stared at her. I know, she said. Don't. You still have it. Don't make it into something. Victoria, it's been 22 years. 23. She said it like she'd counted, like she knew exactly. I know how it sounds. I'm not saying it means what it meant when we were 9. She stopped, looked down. Some things you keep because they're the only honest version of something you believed in, before everything got complicated. She looked back up. That's all. I'm not saying anything else. He looked at her across the table. The December light coming through the diner window was gray and flat, and it fell across her face, and she looked, at this moment, more real than anyone he'd been near in a very long time. Not polished, not performing. Just herself, sitting in a diner after one of the hardest mornings of her professional life, telling him something true. "Thank you for telling me," he said. She nodded once, looked back at her plate. "Don't read into it," she said. "I won't." He picked up his coffee. "I'm just glad you still have it." She didn't respond to that. But she didn't tell him to stop either. They finished their food. The waitress refilled the coffee. Outside, Omaha went about its business, indifferent and ordinary. And inside this booth, something had shifted between them in a way that neither of them named, because naming it would have made it into something they'd have to figure out, and they both had enough things to figure out already. 3 weeks after the board meeting, on a cold Thursday in early January, Dale called Victoria at 6:45 in the morning. She was already awake. She'd been awake since 5, working on the restructuring plan at her kitchen table, the kind of early morning work that happens when you've stopped being able to sleep past 4 and you might as well be useful. She saw Dale's name on the screen and something in her chest went cold. She answered. He told her gently, which was the only way Dale knew how to tell anything. Her father had woken in the night, confused, distressed. By the time Dale arrived, he'd been called by the overnight aide. George had been calm, but his cognition had dropped markedly. The neurologist had been there by 7. The assessment was not good. Victoria drove to the house. She sat with her father for 4 hours. He knew her name, but not always who she was to him. Sometimes she was his daughter. Sometimes she was a patient. Sometimes she was someone he couldn't place but trusted anyway, which she tried to hold on to. The neurologist spoke to her in the hallway in quiet, clinical terms about progression and timeline and managing expectations. And she stood there and listened and nodded and said the right things and felt the floor tilting slightly under her feet the whole time. She called Ethan from the porch at noon. She didn't say anything immediately when he answered. She just held the phone. Victoria. His voice, immediately. No question in it, just her name, the way you say someone's name when you already know. He doesn't, she started, stopped. He doesn't really know who I am today. A beat. I'm coming. You don't have to, I'm coming, 20 minutes. He hung up before she could argue. He was there in 18. He came through the front door and found her sitting on the bottom step of the staircase in the front hall, coat still on, not crying, just sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance. He sat down next to her on the step, not across from her, next to her. And he didn't say anything. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He let her. They sat there in the hallway of her father's house for a long time. From the next room came the soft sound of Dale's voice, reading to George from an old novel. Something George had loved years ago, before all of this. A voice from another room. The specific, irreplaceable sound of a life that was still, for now, present. She didn't cry. She just sat there with her shoulder against his and let herself be held without being held, which was the only way she'd known how to be comforted for a very long time. Outside, the Nebraska January was doing what it always did, cold and indifferent and going on regardless. But in here, on this step, there were 2 people who had found each other again at the exact moment when finding each other was the most necessary thing in the world, and neither of them was going anywhere. And somewhere upstairs in a velvet box on a shelf in an attic neither of them had mentioned again, a cheap plastic ring waited in the dark with the particular patience of something that has been kept for 23 years and has learned that the right moment is worth waiting for. George Sterling died on a Wednesday morning in late February, with Victoria holding his hand and Dale sitting quietly in the corner of the room, and the Nebraska winter pressing pale and still against the windows. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't peaceful in the way people sometimes describe death as peaceful, as if it wraps up neatly. It was slow and then fast, the way those things go. Weeks of gradual fading, and then 2 days of something more urgent, and then a Wednesday morning when his breathing changed, and Dale said quietly that it was time to call anyone she wanted there, and Victoria sat down next to the bed and took her father's hand and stayed. She'd sent Ethan a message at 6 a.m., I think today. He'd driven over immediately, but he didn't go into the room. He sat in the kitchen and made coffee and waited because that was the right thing to do, and he knew it without being told. This was hers. Her father, her grief, her room to be in. It was just past 10 when she came downstairs. She walked into the kitchen and she looked at the coffee on the counter, and she looked at Ethan sitting at the table, and her face was dry and very still, the way faces get when the emotion is so large it stopped having an expression. "He's gone," she said. "I know." He stood up. She crossed the kitchen and walked straight into him. Not the way you fall into someone when you're falling apart, but deliberately, with intention, like she'd decided on it. He put his arms around her and she pressed her face against his shoulder, and he felt her take one long, shaking breath and then hold it, and then something in her gave way. She cried for a long time. Not dramatically, just steadily, with the particular quality of grief that's been held tightly for months and months, and has finally found the moment it's allowed out. He held her and said nothing and did not move until she was done. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red and her face was blotchy, and she looked like someone who had just lost her last parent, which she had. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Don't do that," he said. She looked at him. "Don't apologize for that," he said. "Not to me." She nodded once, looked at the coffee on the counter. "Is that still hot?" "Made it 20 minutes ago." "Good enough." She poured a cup with a slightly unsteady hand and stood at the counter and drank it, and Ethan sat back down and let her have the silence for as long as she needed it. The weeks after George died were the kind of weeks that have their own particular texture, bureaucratic and raw at the same time, full of paperwork and phone calls and arrangements that need to be made, which is both terrible and useful because it gives grief something to do with its hands. Victoria moved through all of it with the efficiency she brought to everything, and Ethan helped where he could and stayed out of the way where he couldn't. Ruth Holloway, who had known George Sterling for 40 years, brought food. The kind of food that small-town Nebraska produces in the face of death. Casseroles and pies and a pot of soup that appeared on the porch without ceremony. Victoria received all of it with genuine gratitude, which surprised her slightly. She was not used to receiving things without wondering what they cost. Lily, in the particular way of children who sense that the adults around them are navigating something heavy, became very focused on being helpful. She asked Victoria, one afternoon, if she could water the plants in George's study. "I've been doing it," she said seriously. "Daddy says plants don't know that someone died. They just need water." Victoria looked at her for a moment. "He's right," she said. "I know." Lily considered the plants in question, a row of them on the windowsill, the kind that had been there for years and had grown complicated and large. "I think he would have liked for them to keep living." "I think so too." Lily went and got the watering can from under the sink, filling it with the focused purpose of someone performing an important duty. Victoria watched her move through the study and felt something loosen in her chest. Not the grief, which was still there, but something alongside it. Something that felt, cautiously, like it might eventually become okay. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He watched Lily water the plants for a moment, then looked at Victoria. "You okay?" he said. "Yes." She paused. "I don't know, both." "That's right." She looked at him across the study. "I keep thinking about things I didn't say. Things I should have said on the good days when he still knew." She stopped. "I keep making a list of all the conversations I should have had. Did you tell him you loved him? Every day? Then the list isn't as long as you think." She looked at him for a moment. He had a way of doing that, cutting through the complicated version of something to the simple version without making the complicated version feel stupid. She'd noticed it from the first week. It was not a common quality. "You're going to be good for someone," she said. She said it almost to herself, without thinking. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Careful, held back, but present. "I hope so," he said. Neither of them said anything else. Lily declared the plants watered and came to show them both the empty watering can as evidence of a job completed. March arrived. The restructuring plan Victoria had submitted to the board in late January had been accepted quietly and without drama by all 7 members. The cuts had been hard. 43 positions, mostly redundant layers of middle management that Carr had built up over 3 years. And she'd handled every termination herself personally, which had taken 2 weeks and cost her more than she'd expected it to. Some of those people had been there since the beginning. Some of them had not known what Carr was doing and were genuinely blindsided. She'd sat across from each of them and delivered the news with the directness she'd always believed people deserved, and she'd offered severance that was more than the contracts required. And she'd gone home each evening and sat very quietly for a while before she could do anything else. 43 people, she told Ethan one evening. They were at his mother's kitchen table. She'd been spending more time at Ruth's house, which had started as practical and had become gradually something else. 43 conversations. I kept thinking about how each of them was going to call someone that night and say what happened. I kept thinking about who was waiting for those calls. Did any of them come back at you? One, Marcus Webb, he was a regional coordinator. He said I was the one who built the machine that cost him his job. She looked at her hands. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't entirely right either. No, but he wasn't wrong enough for me to dismiss it. She was quiet for a moment. Carr built those layers on purpose, to insulate himself, to have people who reported to him rather than to the company. I should have caught it earlier. That's on me. Ethan looked at her. You know what I've been doing for the past 2 months? Going through the Whitfield project files, the ones from Chicago. Going through every decision point where I could have pushed harder, escalated differently, made a different call. He paused. After a certain point, that exercise stops being useful and starts being punishment. She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his coffee. And she had the sense that he was saying this from somewhere real, from somewhere it had cost him something to figure out. When does it stop being useful, she said. When you've learned everything you can actually use and the rest is just hurting yourself. How do you know when you've hit that line? He finally looked up. I don't think there's a reliable way to know. I think you just decide at some point that you've done enough accounting. He held her gaze. You're a better CEO than Carr wanted the board to believe. You're also not a perfect one. Neither of those things is news to you. She looked at him for a long time. You don't perform, she said. What? You don't? When you talk to me, you're not managing how I'll take it. You just say it. She paused. Most people who talk to me are performing for me. They're calculating the angle. She glanced away. You don't do that. I've been talking to you the same way since we were 9 years old. I know. She said it quietly. That's what I mean. The kitchen was quiet. Ruth had gone to bed early. Lily was asleep in the back bedroom where she'd started falling asleep more often than not. Gerald lodged under her arm, having apparently decided that George Sterling's old house had enough interesting plants and enough older adults who would read to her to constitute a second home. Ethan had stopped being surprised by this. He was fairly sure Lily had made her own decision about where things were headed between the two adults in her life and had simply started behaving accordingly, with the pragmatic forward motion of someone who hadn't yet learned to doubt her own instincts. He envied her that. I've been thinking about selling the company, Victoria said. He looked at her. Not to the German firm, not as a failure, but, She exhaled. The board vote was 4-3. Mira made the restructuring a condition. In March, if the numbers don't show improvement, the acquisition question comes back. She looked at the table. I have been running this company since I was 23 years old. I have been making decisions about 700 people's livelihoods for 7 years. I have been... She stopped. I don't know if I want to keep doing it. Because of your dad? Partly, but partly because... She was choosing words carefully, and he could see her doing it. The slight hesitation of someone trying to be honest about something they haven't been fully honest about yet. I started this company because I had a problem to solve. The agricultural logistics thing. It was real. It was specific. It was mine. Sterling Analytics became something different. Something bigger. And somewhere in the last 3 years I started running it because it existed and I'd built it and walking away felt like losing. Not because I loved it. She looked up. I haven't loved it in 3 years. I just didn't want to be the one who quit. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's a different thing than quitting. The board won't see it that way. The press won't see it. You're going to make your decisions based on what the board and the press call it? She looked at him. My whole professional life is what people call it. That's how capital works. Perception is, I know how capital works. I'm asking if you're going to let it make this decision for you. She was quiet, long enough that he wasn't sure she was going to answer. I'm scared, she said finally. It came out smaller than her normal voice. I'm not used to saying that. I know. If I sell, if I walk away, I don't know who I am without it. The company is what I've been for 7 years. It's how people know me. She stopped. I built it from nothing. What does it mean that I'm choosing to walk away from something I built? He looked at her carefully for a moment. There were several things he could have said. Reassurances, logical arguments, the business case for an exit on her terms versus a forced exit in March. He didn't say any of those things. He said the thing that was true. It means you're choosing your life, he said. It means you're deciding that who you are is bigger than what you built. Not everyone figures that out. He paused. Some people never do. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen light was yellow, and the Nebraska night was dark outside the windows. And she looked, at this moment, like she was standing at an edge she'd been walking toward for years without quite knowing it. I'm going to sell, she said, quietly, with the particular quality of a decision that's been living in you for a long time finally becoming a sentence. Okay, he said. On my terms. My buyer, my structure, my conditions for the employees. Okay. And if the press calls it a failure, that's what they call it. Let them. She exhaled. One long, controlled exhale, like something releasing. You make it sound simple. I make it sound like it's yours to decide, he said. Which it is. She looked at him. Something in her expression that he'd been noticing more lately. An openness, an unguardedness, the absence of the careful management she applied to every other interaction in her life. She didn't manage him. She'd stopped gradually over the past 4 months, and he didn't think she'd noticed it consciously. He had. Ethan. She said his name the way you say something you've been thinking about and finally decided to let out. What are we doing? He looked at her steadily. What do you mean? I mean, she gestured slightly, encompassing the kitchen, the house, the situation, all of it. This, whatever this is, you're here every day. Your daughter is sleeping in my late father's house. Your mother sends me soup. Stopped. I have more of a life here than I've had anywhere in years, and I'm not sure when that happened. He was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was something he'd been having a conversation with himself about for a while, and he hadn't finished that conversation, and he wasn't sure he was ready to have a different version of it out loud. But she was looking at him with the direct, unflinching look she'd always had, the one that had never let him get away with the managed version of an answer. I don't know exactly what this is, he said, but I know I'm not here because I feel sorry for you, and I'm not here because you helped me with the Omaha firm, and I'm not... He paused. I'm here because when I think about being somewhere that isn't here, it doesn't make sense to me. She held his gaze. Something in her eyes, not the almost smile, something more serious and more real than that. I haven't let myself, she started. I'm not good at this. At the personal version of this. I'm good at decisions and strategy and reading rooms, and this is none of those things, and I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. It doesn't need a decision right now. Everything in my life needs a decision. Not this. He held her gaze. This is the one thing that doesn't. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen settled around them, quiet and warm, and somewhere in the back of the house a floorboard creaked the way old houses creak, shifting and settling, doing what old things do. She looked down at the table, then back up. Okay, she said finally. Not tonight. Not tonight, he agreed. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside, the February into March Nebraska night was doing what it always did, cold and dark and going on regardless. Inside, neither of them moved to leave the table. April came and the land woke up the way it did every year out here, tentative at first and then all at once, the fields going from straw brown to green in what felt like a single week. The trees on Birch Avenue put out leaves. The morning smelled like mud and cold air and something opening. Victoria signed the letter of intent to sell Sterling Analytics on an afternoon in early April. She'd found her buyer, a domestic firm with a clean record and a clear commitment, in writing, to maintain headcount for a minimum of 3 years. The valuation was not the $2.3 billion the German firm had offered. It was less than that, and she had sat with that number for 3 days before signing, and she'd signed anyway. She called Ethan from the parking lot of the attorney's office. "Done," she said. "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Light," she said. "I feel lighter than I expected." "That's your answer." "The press release goes out tomorrow. It'll be bad." "Let it be bad." Billionaire walks away from company she built. She said it with the flat tone of someone reciting a headline they've already heard in their head. That's the best case. Worst case is, Victoria, you know what the actual worst case was? She was quiet. "Car winning," he said. "The acquisition going through on their terms. 700 people finding out on a Monday morning." He paused. That was the worst case. Everything else is just noise. She sat in the parking lot for a moment. The April afternoon was cool and bright. A woman walked past the car with a stroller, not looking at anything in particular, just walking. Ordinary afternoon. Nothing remarkable about it from the outside. "I want to start something smaller," she said. "Something I can actually touch. Community investment. There are agricultural projects in this region that are underfunded and understudied, and I know this sector better than most people who have money to put into it." She paused. "I want to do work that I want to be able to explain to Lily what I do and have it make sense to her." He was quiet for a second, not a silence of surprise, a silence of someone taking something in. "She'd like that," he said. "I know." A beat. "I've been thinking about her a lot, about what it means that she goes to sleep in my father's house and calls me Tori." Ethan was quiet. "She started calling me Tori," Victoria said. "I don't know when she started. I noticed it last week. She just decided." "She makes decisions like that," Ethan said, "without asking permission. Does that bother you, that she's—" "No," he said before she could finish. "It doesn't bother me." Another silence. Longer. The kind that had been happening more between them lately. Not awkward silences. Not the silence of people who don't know what to say, but the silence of people who know exactly what they want to say and are deciding whether it's the right moment. "Come over tonight," she said. "I'll make dinner. Real dinner, not takeout." "You cook?" "I haven't in 3 years, but I used to." A pause. "I want to try." "Lily's going to have opinions about the menu." "I know. Tell her we're having pasta." "She'll want to know what kind." "Tell her the kind with the red sauce." "She'll accept that." He paused. "We'll be there at 6. "Okay." She sat in the parking lot for another minute after she hung up, looking at nothing in particular, feeling the specific strange lightness of a major thing being finished. The sale would take months to close. There would be more paperwork, more board meetings, more press. The next weeks would not be easy. But right now, in this parking lot, in this April afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten it had a name. She felt like she was going home. Not to a place, not to the house on the edge of Millhaven or the Sterling Analytics offices in Omaha. To something more specific and harder to explain. The feeling of being in the right life, the right version of your own story, the one that fits the way nothing else quite does. She started the car and drove back to Millhaven. Ethan was already there when she pulled into the driveway, which meant he'd left early, which meant he'd wanted to. He was on the porch with Lily, who was showing him something in the grass with great seriousness, some insect or plant or feature of the earth that only 6-year-olds found worth stopping for. He looked up when her car pulled in and lifted one hand in the uncomplicated wave of someone who was exactly where they planned to be. She sat in the car for just a second before she got out. Then she got out, walked up the porch steps, and Lily immediately pivoted to show her the thing in the grass instead, and Ethan moved over on the porch steps to make room, and the three of them crouched over whatever small thing Lily had found while the April afternoon went golden around them. Nothing about it was dramatic. It was just right. The pasta dinner was not a success. Victoria burned the sauce, not badly, not inedibly, but enough that the bottom of the pot went dark, and the whole kitchen smelled like something between tomato and regret. She stood at the stove, scraping the bottom with a wooden spoon, and making a face that Lily, who had appointed herself kitchen observer, described with clinical accuracy as worried. "It's fine," Ethan said from the kitchen table where he had been told to sit and not interfere. "It's not fine, the bottom is burned." "The top is fine, serve from the top." That's not how cooking works." "It's exactly how cooking works when the bottom is burned." He looked at Lily. "Right?" Lily considered this with great seriousness. "Gerald says it smells okay," she offered diplomatically. Victoria looked at the pot, looked at the two of them at the table, looked back at the pot. She exhaled. "Fine," she said. "We're serving from the top." It was, in the end, perfectly edible. They ate at George Sterling's kitchen table with the April evening coming through the windows, and Lily telling them about a disagreement she'd had with a boy in her class named Cooper who had claimed that rabbits didn't have feelings, which she considered not only wrong, but personally offensive on Gerald's behalf. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions with the seriousness the topic deserved, and Lily approved of this response and expanded her account considerably. Ethan watched them across the table. He had a habit of doing that lately, stepping slightly outside the moment to look at it, the way you step back from something you're building to see the whole shape of it. What he saw was this: his daughter, animated and certain and completely at home. Victoria, leaning forward with her chin in her hand, genuinely engaged, something easy in her expression that wasn't there 6 months ago. The kitchen warm. The food imperfect. Everything approximately right. He thought about the drive back to Mill Haven in November. The $40. The truck making its death rattle sound on Route 9. The specific shame of a man who had called his mother because there was nobody else to call. He thought about how that night, that drive, that shame, all of it had pointed here. Not because some larger plan had been operating, not because things work out the way they're supposed to, but because he'd come home, and home had turned out to contain something he hadn't known he was missing. "Cooper is wrong," Victoria was telling Lily. "There's substantial research on rabbit cognition and emotional response. They form attachments. They experience stress. They absolutely have feelings." Lily looked vindicated in the deepest possible way. "I told him that." "Good. If he argues with you again, you can tell him a scientist said so." "Are you a scientist?" "No, but I've funded scientists, which is adjacent." Lily absorbed this. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell him a scientist boss said so." Ethan laughed. He didn't catch it in time. It came out real and unguarded, the kind of laugh that happens when something is genuinely funny and you're too relaxed to manage your reaction. Victoria looked at him, and her expression did the thing it had been doing more frequently. The real smile, the one that reached her eyes, the one that was nothing like the careful professional version she wore in photographs. The burned sauce pasta was, in retrospect, one of the better dinners he could remember. The sale of Sterling Analytics closed on a Thursday in late June, 14 months after Ethan had driven back into Mill Haven with $40 and a 6-year-old and nothing else. The headline, as predicted, was not kind. A financial blog with a larger readership than it deserved ran "Sterling Exits. Billionaire walks away from her own company," with a subheading about uncertainty and leadership questions. And for about 72 hours it got picked up and recirculated and commented on by people who had never met Victoria Sterling and had no particular stake in what she did with her life. She read the coverage on a Friday morning at Ethan's mother's kitchen table, which had become, gradually and without formal announcement, something like her regular table. Ruth had long since stopped pretending to be surprised when Victoria appeared at the door. She simply made an extra cup of coffee and asked whether she wanted eggs. "They're saying I panicked," Victoria said, looking at her phone, "that the board pressure broke me." "What do you think?" Ruth asked, setting a cup down in front of her. Victoria looked at the article, looked at Ruth. I think I made the right call. Then that's what matters. Ruth said it in the flat, decided way of a woman who had been making calls and living with them for 60 years and had arrived at the conclusion that other people's opinions of your decisions were a luxury you couldn't always afford. She went back to the stove. Eat your eggs. Victoria put the phone face down on the table. Ethan came in from the back porch where he'd been on a call with the Omaha firm. He'd been there officially for 4 months now, project lead on a municipal infrastructure contract that was the first real piece of work with his name on it since the collapse of the Chicago firm. He looked at the phone face down on the table and then at Victoria. How bad? He said. Manageable. She picked up the coffee. I've decided I'm not reading it past today. Good decision. I have a lot of those now. She said it without irony. It turns out when you're not running 700 people, you have more mental space for your own life. He sat down across from her. The Community Investment Fund. You talked to Marcus Webb yet? She looked at him. Webb, the man who'd confronted her at the restructuring, the one who'd said she'd built the machine that cost him his job. She'd been thinking about him for months. I called him last week, she said. He didn't hang up. That's something. He's been consulting for a regional co-op outside Lincoln. He knows the agricultural supply chain in this area better than almost anyone. She paused. I offered him a role in the fund, advisory, to start. He said he'd think about it. Ethan looked at her. That must have been a hard call to make. Yes, she said it plainly. He was angry, and he had a right to be, and I needed to be able to sit with that without defending myself. She looked at her coffee. I've spent a lot of my professional life being good at being right. I'm less practiced at being present when I'm wrong. A pause. I'm working on it. He'll come around, Ethan said. Maybe. Either way, I needed to make the call. She looked out the window. The June morning was green and warm, the kind of Nebraska morning that makes you understand why people stay in Nebraska. The fund is starting to take shape. 3 projects in the pipeline, 2 in this county, 1 in the next. Small scale. The kind of thing I can actually see. She paused. I drove out to one of the farms last week, just to look at it. It's a family operation, 3rd generation. They've been losing ground to the bigger operators for years. The woman who runs it, her name is Carol. She's maybe 50. She has the kind of hands that have been working a long time. Victoria stopped. She showed me her irrigation system, the whole setup. She was proud of it, and she should have been. She built it herself, adapted it from equipment that wasn't designed for this specific soil type. It was actually elegant. Ethan was watching her. I want to help that stay in the world, she said. That specific thing, that farm, that woman's work. She looked at him. That's what I want to fund, not abstractions, not portfolios, Then that's what you should fund. It's a lot smaller than what I was doing. Smaller isn't the same as less. She looked at him. No, she said. It isn't. Mashat. The summer moved the way Nebraska summers do. Hot and loud with insects and full of weather that builds on the horizon and comes in fast. Lily turned 7 in July, and the party was held in the backyard of George Sterling's house, which had become, by a process of gradual and unanimous agreement, the house where things happened. Ruth came. Dale came, which surprised Victoria until she thought about it and realized it shouldn't have. 3 kids from Lily's class came with their parents, and Carol from the farm came because Lily had met her once and declared her interesting, and for an afternoon the yard was full of people eating cake and someone's dog getting into the cooler, and Lily conducting a tour of the garden for anyone who would follow her. Victoria stood on the porch watching it, and Ethan came and stood next to her. She's going to be terrifying when she's grown, he said. She's already terrifying. She just does it very politely. He looked at the yard. At Lily explaining something to a 7-year-old boy who had the expression of someone being gently lectured. At his mother talking with Dale. At Carol laughing at something, her weathered face open and easy. At the ordinary chaos of people eating bad potato salad and being alive in the same place at the same time. I've been thinking about something, he said. Victoria looked at him. I want to show you something tonight, after everyone's gone. She studied his face. He was doing the controlled thing, the thing she'd learned to read on him over the past 8 months, when he was feeling something specific and was deciding how to bring it out. "Should I be worried?" she said. "No." "You look like you're about to tell me something that requires sitting down." "You're already standing." "Ethan." "Tonight," he said, "after everyone's gone." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the yard where Lily had now acquired 3 followers for her garden tour and was pointing at something in the flower bed with the authority of a 7-year-old who has decided she is in charge. "Okay," Victoria said. "Tonight." It took 2 hours to clear everyone out. Ruth went home at 7, after hugging Lily for a long time and telling Victoria, in Ruth's particular way, brief, firm, no room for argument, that she was glad she was around. Carol left with a piece of leftover cake wrapped in foil that she hadn't asked for and accepted without objection. The other families trickled out in the way parties end, slowly and then all at once. Lily fell asleep on the couch at 8:15 with Gerald and the particular boneless completeness of a 7-year-old who has extracted every possible unit of energy from a day and deposited them all somewhere permanent. Ethan covered her with a blanket and stood in the doorway of the living room looking at her for a moment in the way parents look at sleeping children, which is its own kind of thing that doesn't have a name but should. Victoria was in the kitchen washing dishes when he came in. "Leave those," he said. "I'm almost—" "Victoria, leave the dishes." She turned off the water, looked at him over her shoulder. "You're serious about tonight? Come with me." She dried her hands. He led her out of the kitchen, through the dining room, past George's study with its watered plants still growing in the window, and up the stairs. She followed without asking, which was its own thing, a trust she'd extended to him gradually over 8 months until it had become, without her quite deciding it, the default position. He stopped in front of the attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway. She went still. "You know where I'm taking you," he said. "Yes." Her voice was quiet. "Do you want to get it yourself, or do you want me to—" "I'll get it." She moved past him and opened the attic door. The stairs were narrow. The light was the particular dusty yellow of attic light, and she climbed them in a way that told him she'd climbed them before. Recently, maybe more than once, the way you return to a thing you've been keeping for a long time. He heard her footsteps on the boards above. A brief silence. Then she came back down the stairs with the velvet box in her hand. Small, dark blue. The kind of box that had once held something real and had been repurposed for something that meant more than what it was. She stood at the bottom of the attic stairs and held it out to him. He took it, opened it. The ring was exactly what he remembered, which was strange because he'd only seen it once, 23 years ago, in the parking lot of a gas station on the edge of town. Purple plastic, cracked on one side. The kind of thing a gumball machine spits out for a quarter. It was smaller than he remembered. Everything from childhood is, when you go back to it. He looked at it for a long moment. He looked at her. "I owe you a better one," he said. She looked at him with the direct, unflinching look she'd always had, the one that had never let him get away with the managed version of anything. "I didn't keep it because it was good," she said. "I kept it because it was real." "I know." He closed the box, held it in both hands for a second. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket, the jacket he'd been wearing all day, the jacket he'd put on that morning with something specific in his pocket, and he brought out a different box. This one was smaller, newer, a jeweler's box, dark gray. He held it out to her. She took it and opened it. Inside was a ring. Not elaborate, not the kind of thing designed to announce wealth or prove a point, but a clean, considered ring, a narrow gold band with a single stone, the kind of thing chosen by someone who had thought about what would suit her specifically and had ignored everything else. She looked at it, looked at him. "Ethan, I know the timing is— I know it's been 8 months. I know we haven't said—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not good at this version of saying things. I'm better at the practical version." He looked at her. "So the practical version is, I came back to Millhaven with nothing, and everything that's good in my life right now, the work, the place, the version of myself I can stand to be, it all happened here. Most of it happened because of you, and around you, and next to you. He paused. Lily calls you Tori. She did that herself. She didn't ask me. She just decided you were part of her life and started acting like it. Victoria's jaw was tight. Her eyes were very bright. I'm not a perfect option, he said. I'm broke by most definitions, and I'm starting over professionally, and I'm not always easy to be around when things are difficult. I know all of that. He held her gaze. But I'm not going anywhere. I wasn't going anywhere before I knew how I felt about you, and I'm definitely not going anywhere now. She looked at the ring in the box, looked at him. Her hand was not entirely steady. You planned this, she said. The party, I've been carrying that ring for 3 weeks, he said. I was waiting for a moment that felt right, and I kept finding reasons why it wasn't right yet. Tonight felt right. He paused. Lily turning 7 felt right. You on the porch watching the yard felt right. She was quiet for a long moment. He let her have it. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I'm good at decisions, and I'm terrible at this, at saying the true version of what I feel. She looked at him. You know I'm going to be difficult. I know. I work too much. Even now, even with the smaller thing, I go too far in. I lose track of what's around me. I've done it my whole life. I know that too. You can't just... She stopped. You can't just say I know to everything. I know you, he said, steadily. Not the version you manage for other people. The version that burns the pasta sauce and keeps a plastic ring for 23 years and cries at the kitchen table and calls me at 10:30 when she can't sleep. He looked at her. I know that person. I want that person. She looked at him for a long time. The attic door was still open behind her. The upstairs hallway was dim. From downstairs came the particular quiet of a house with a sleeping child in it. A specific, contented quiet. The kind that means something. Yes, she said. It came out without hesitation, like she'd been holding it and it had decided on its own that now was the moment. Yes. Obviously, yes. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, which she appeared not to forgive herself for immediately, but allowed to stand. He put the plastic ring box in his jacket pocket. He took the real ring from the gray box and he put it on her finger, which required slightly more effort than these moments do in stories, because her hands were cold from the dishwater and the ring needed a firm push past the knuckle, and they both laughed when it finally seated, which was not the cinematic version of this moment, but was so specifically them that neither of them would have changed it. She looked at the ring on her hand, looked at him. The plastic one, she said. I want to keep it. I'm not throwing away the plastic one. Good. She looked at him. Then she crossed the 2 feet of hallway between them and kissed him, which was also not particularly cinematic. It was the first time, and first times are their own kind of awkward and real. But it was honest, and it was right, and when she pulled back, they were both standing very close with the attic door open behind them, and the sleeping house around them, and 23 years of something finally resolved. Tori! Lily's voice floated up from downstairs, which meant she'd woken up, which Lily did sometimes in the middle of the night when she had things to report. Gerald says he heard talking. Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Gerald has very good hearing for a stuffed rabbit, Victoria called back. A pause. Are you coming downstairs? In a minute. Another pause, then with the pragmatic satisfaction of a 7-year-old whose instincts about the world have once again proven correct. Okay. They told Lily the next morning, over breakfast, in the clear Nebraska summer light. Ethan had thought about how to frame it, whether to use particular words, whether to take any specific approach. In the end, Victoria was the one who said it, simply and directly, because that was how she did things. Your dad asked me to marry him, she said. And I said yes, which means I'm going to be part of your family, if that's something you want. Lily looked at the ring, looked at Victoria, looked at Ethan, looked at the ring again. I already decided you were part of our family, she said, a long time ago. I know, Victoria said, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with you officially. Lily picked up her fork. It's official, she said. Gerald agrees. She pointed the fork at the ring. That's very shiny. Too shiny? No, it's good shiny. She went back to her eggs. Can we have pancakes tomorrow? Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. Yes, they said, at the same moment. There are things nobody tells you about starting over at 32. They don't tell you that the rebuilding is slower than the falling and more deliberate and requires a different kind of attention. They don't tell you that the person you become on the other side of a hard thing is not automatically better than the one you were before. That's too clean, too tidy, too much like the ending of a story that wants to make a point. What actually happens is messier. You're still the same person with the same gaps and the same habits and the same particular ways of being difficult. You've just, maybe, learned something about which parts of yourself to trust. Ethan learned that coming home was not a retreat. He had told himself on that drive back on Route 9 that returning to Millhaven was the evidence of everything he'd failed to be. The city life, the career, the version of himself that had gotten out and made it. He'd been wrong about that, but not in the easy way, where the truth is simply the opposite. The truth was more specific. The place didn't matter. The life you're building matters. The people you're building it with matter. Everything else is backdrop. He got a call from a colleague in October, someone from the Chicago days, someone who'd landed well after the firm's collapse, who had a lead on a contract in Denver. Good money, real work, his name on a significant project. He thought about it for 2 days. Then he called back and said he was committed to something in Nebraska and asked to be kept in mind for future projects. He hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen of George Sterling's house, his house now, or it would be, and felt the specific non-feeling of a door closing that you're okay with closing. The Omaha firm made him a formal offer of partnership in September. Not senior partnership, he wasn't there yet, but a real piece of the firm, real skin in the game, his name on the door in a way that meant something. He accepted. The work was good. The projects were unglamorous and specific and mostly municipal. Bridges, drainage systems, the hidden infrastructure that keeps places functioning without anyone thinking much about it. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He did not think about the Whitfield project every day anymore. He thought about it sometimes. He suspected he would think about it for a long time, not with the acute shame of the first year, but with the lower grade awareness of someone who has learned something the hard way and intends not to forget it. That seemed right. That seemed honest. The clean resolution, where you stop thinking about the thing entirely, was for stories that wanted to be tidier than life. Victoria's Community Investment Fund. She named it the Sterling Holloway Agricultural Development Fund, which Ethan argued against because he felt his name on it was premature, and she said she would put his name on it if she felt like it, which was, he reflected, a very Victoria way to win an argument. Had its first full year of operation by the time the wedding was planned. 3 farms in the fund. Carol's operation had expanded its irrigation system and added 2 employees. A second-generation grain operation 20 miles out had restructured its debt with the fund's support and stayed solvent through a bad harvest season. A young woman named Patricia had started a diversified vegetable farm on land she'd inherited and couldn't afford to develop, and it was producing now, imperfectly and with 100 ongoing problems, but producing. Victoria drove out to see each of them once a month. She had stopped going in with the energy of someone managing a portfolio and had started going in with the energy of someone paying attention. It was a subtle difference that the farmers noticed, though none of them would have named it that way. What they said to each other and to county extension agents and to anyone who asked was that she showed up and she listened, and she didn't pretend she knew more than she did. For Victoria, it was the first time in her professional life that the gap between what she said she cared about and how she actually spent her days was small enough to step over without looking down. Marcus Webb called her in August. "I thought about your offer," he said. "I figured you might," she said. "I want specific terms. I want to know exactly what my role is, and I want it in writing." "That's reasonable." "And I want—" He stopped. She waited. "I want it acknowledged somewhere formally what happened with the restructuring, not for legal reasons. Just, I want it on record that what happened happened." "I can do that," she said. "I should have done it already." A pause. "Okay," he said. "I'll come in." He came in. He was as sharp as she remembered, sharper in some ways. The experience with the co-op had given him practical knowledge that books don't give you. They argued during the first meeting about the fund's criteria for qualifying projects, and it was a real argument, not a managed one. And when it was over, the criteria were better than before. She hired him. He was, within 6 months, the person in the fund she trusted most to tell her when she was wrong. She told Ethan about it one evening. "He told me today that I still think too much like a capital allocator," she said. "That I'm getting better, but I've got years of that instinct to unlearn." "Is he right?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes, probably." She paused. It's a strange thing being told by someone who is angry at you that you're better than you were. It doesn't feel the way you expect. "How does it feel?" "Like work," she said. "Like real work, not the kind you can finish." He looked at her. "Good kind or bad kind?" She considered. "Good kind," she said. "The kind that means you're still in it." Bond. They were married on an October Saturday. The particular kind of Nebraska October that the calendar could not have improved on if it had tried. Cool and clear, the trees turned, the light gone that specific amber that makes everything look like it's been kept. It was not a large wedding. Victoria had thought about large and had decided against it, which Ethan had not argued with because it was her call, and also because he didn't want a large wedding either. What they had was small and specific. Ruth. Dale, who cried, which surprised everyone. Carol from the farm. Marcus Webb, who shook Ethan's hand with the firmness of someone who had decided to be present for something even when the history was complicated. The Omaha firm's managing partner, who had become something like a friend. A few people from Millhaven who had known Victoria's father and came for him as much as for her. And Lily, in a dress she had picked herself, yellow, which had been non-negotiable, with a small spray of white flowers that she held with the focused solemnity of someone performing an important function. She walked with Victoria, which had not been planned exactly. It had just happened, the way things happen with Lily, by her decision and without prior consultation. She had taken Victoria's hand that morning and not let go until they reached the place where Ethan was standing, and then she'd stood between them for a moment, looked at her father, looked at Victoria, appeared satisfied with what she saw, and stepped aside to stand with Ruth. The ceremony was short. They'd written their own words, which had been harder for Ethan than most things he'd done in the past 2 years. He had stood at that kitchen table 3 nights in a row, trying to write the thing that was true and not sentimental in the bad way. And every version he wrote felt either too small or too large. And in the end, he'd given up on the crafted version and written the plain one. "I drove back to Millhaven in November last year," he said, standing in front of her in the October light, "with no real plan except that I had nowhere else to go. I didn't come back for you. I want to be honest about that. I came back because I was out of options." He held her gaze. "But I stayed because of you, not because I needed something from you. Because you made me want to stay. Because being in the same room with you reminded me of the best parts of who I was before I got lost in other things." He paused. "You're not easy. I want the record to show that I know you're not easy. You're stubborn and you're private, and you hold things too long before you let anyone in." He paused again. "I'm some of those things too. I think we're going to be fine." There was a sound from the gathered people that was almost a laugh. Victoria had looked at him the whole time. She looked at him now for a moment before she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was even. She had decided to be even. He could see that. It was a deliberate choice. But he could see what it cost her. "I kept a plastic ring in a velvet box for 23 years, she said. "I've told myself different versions of why, that it was just a thing I held on to, that it was nostalgia, that it didn't mean anything specific." She stopped. "The real version is that it meant the last time I was completely myself around someone. Before the company, before the money, before everything had stakes attached to it." She looked at him. "You walked back into my life, and you were exactly the same. In the specific way that matters. You still said what you thought. You still stayed when things got hard. You still fixed things that were broken without being asked." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't know how much I needed that to be possible. That someone could stay the same in the ways that count." She looked at the ring on her finger, the real one, and back at him. "I'm going to love you imperfectly, and I'm going to get it wrong sometimes, and I'm going to need you to tell me when I do, because I don't always see it myself, but I'm going to show up." She held his gaze. "I'm going to keep showing up. That's everything I know how to promise." Lily, standing next to Ruth, nodded once with the expression of someone whose expectations have been confirmed. Later, after everything, after the afternoon had gone long and warm and the small crowd had thinned and the October light had gone gold and then gone, Ethan found himself standing in George Sterling's study while Victoria was in the yard with Lily, who had made friends with the one child present and was conducting what appeared to be a comprehensive tour of everything the property had to offer. He stood in the study and looked at the plants on the windowsill. Still alive, still tended, a continuation of something that had started before he arrived, and would go on past whatever chapter he was in. The bookshelves George had filled over 30 years. The photograph on the desk of Victoria, at about 12 years old, standing in this yard, squinting into the sun, not yet any of the things she would become. He thought about what she'd said, about being completely herself around someone, about needing that to be possible. He understood that. He had spent years performing a version of himself, the engineer, the husband, the professional, the man who was handling things, that had been real enough to sustain for a while but had not been the whole thing. Coming back had stripped that away. Not nicely, not cleanly. It had stripped it away the way a bad year strips things, by taking enough from you that you can't afford to carry what isn't necessary anymore. What was left, the thing that remained after the firm and the apartment and the money and the constructed life, was what he'd had when he was 10 years old in a small Nebraska town. The ability to look at something and see it clearly, the willingness to say what he saw, and the instinct to stay. It turned out that was enough. Maybe it was always the thing that was enough. Victoria appeared in the doorway. She'd taken off her shoes somewhere, and she was standing in the doorway in her wedding dress, in her late father's study, in her bare feet, with the October light behind her, looking at him with the unguarded expression she'd given him piece by piece over the past year, until it had become the way she looked at him by default. "Lily wants to know if she can have cake again," she said. "She already had cake." "I know. I told her to ask you." "You're passing the problem to me." "I'm the new stepmother. I'm building goodwill." She leaned against the doorframe. "What are you doing in here?" "Looking at the plants. Lily watered them this morning. She didn't tell me. I found her in here with the watering can." He looked at the plants, looked at her. "She's a good kid." "She's the best kid." Victoria said it simply, without performance. "I know I'm supposed to let you say that because she's yours, but she's—" She stopped. "She's mine too. She decided that herself, and I've decided it too. She's mine." He looked at her. "I know." "Stop saying I know." "I know." She threw a look at him that was equal parts exasperation and something much warmer than that. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window, and they both looked out at the yard, where Lily was explaining something to a 6-year-old boy who was nodding with the expression of someone being gently required to learn. "This is a good life," Victoria said. Not like she was making a point, like she was telling him something she'd recently established as fact and wanted someone else to have the information. "Yeah," he said. "I wasn't sure I was going to get one. A good one." She paused. "I think I thought the company was going to be the thing. And then when the company was going, I didn't know what was left." She looked at the yard. "It turns out a lot was left. That's not something you can know from inside it." He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her and she leaned against him slightly. The particular lean of someone who has decided this is where their weight goes and has stopped second-guessing it. Outside, Lily was now pushing the 6-year-old on the old wooden swing at the back of the yard, the one George Sterling had built in 1987 and never taken down, the one Victoria had played on as a child, the one that had been there through everything this yard had seen. It creaked with each pass, the way old things creak, and the sound came through the window along with the October air and the smell of the turning leaves and the particular quality of a late afternoon that knows it's finishing but hasn't finished yet. "Cake?" Ethan said. "Cake," Victoria agreed. They went out to the yard together, to the kid who was theirs, and the people who had stayed, and the October afternoon that was already becoming a memory, and the swing creaked its old wooden creak, and the light did what October light does in Nebraska. Turned everything briefly gold before it went. The way good things do when they're real, present and beautiful, and not promised to last forever, which is exactly the reason to be here for them now. The plastic ring stayed in its velvet box on the shelf in the attic. Not discarded, not replaced, kept, the way you keep the first draft of something that became something better. Not because the first version was the best one, but because it was the honest one, the one that was written before anyone knew it had to be good, when all it had to be was true. Some things are worth keeping for 23 years. Some promises take exactly as long as they need to.